Assalamu alaikum my dear students. Today I will tell you about the differences that exist between the action potential of skeletal muscle, smooth muscle and the cardiac muscles. In the previous video I have told you about the differences in the action potential in the tabular form. But now I would tell you the difference in the action potential of the smooth, skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle in the graphical form. So first of all, talking about the skeletal muscle, we know that the resting membrane potential of skeletal muscle is minus 70 millivolts, and now there comes the depolarization phase. Depolarization, we know that happens when the sodium ions influx occur from the ECF into the cell. Then what happens that the phase of the repolarization come, and you can see that the depolarization peak is achieved at the plus 10 millivolts. Now the phase of repolarization comes, and now how repolarization occurs? Repolarization occurs when the potassium ions efflux occur from the cell into the ECF. Now you can see that this curve, this line is coming down, and here when it comes here, what happens that further decrease, you can say further decrease in the curve is you can observe. Now why this further increase in the curve? The reason of this is because the channels of the potassium ions closes very much slowly as compared to the sodium ion channels. So that's why you can see here a deep curve, and you can see that further negative potential is obtained because what happens that the potassium ion channels do not close quickly, they close slowly. That's why this curve is obtained, and after this again resting membrane potential is restored. You can see that how the resting membrane potential is restored when again the sodium ions get entry from the ECF into the cell. So this mechanism occur. Now we know that what has actually happened. Sodium ions has gained entry from the ECF into the cell, and potassium ions have moved out. So what is actually the condition right now is that the sodium ions inside the cell are now more, and potassium ions are less. So in order to maintain the balance, the potassium ion must need to be more inside the cell, and potassium ions are must need to be less inside the cell. So in order to maintain that balance, a pump exists which is known as the sodium potassium pump, sodium potassium pump. So what is the job of that pump? This sodium potassium pump actually maintains the balance, and these actually this pump actually you can say causes the exit of the two sodium ions out from the cell, and causes the entry of one potassium ions. So one potassium ion is entered into the cell, and two sodium ions are moved from the cell into the ECF. This is how sodium potassium pump works. So this is all about the skeletal muscle. Now talking about the smooth muscle. In smooth muscle, the resting membrane potential is minus 60 millivolts. We know that. Now there would be the phase of depolarization, and the peak would be obtained at the at the level of the plus 10 millivolts. Now in this particular muscle, what is the difference? That along with the sodium channels, there are also calcium channel presence. So both these channels are, you can say, working together in order to obtain the action potential. So both sodium and calcium channels are 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 actually both sodium and calcium channels are actually responsible for obtaining the action potential here. Now sodium ions and calcium ions both are getting entry from the ECF into the cell, and both are causing the depolarization. Now again, what is the cause of this plateau phase? This is known as the plateau phase. You must need to remember, this is the plateau phase. Now we know that calcium ions have are now calcium channels are open, and calcium ions are getting entry from the ECF into the cell. So there will be the plateau phase here. Why? Because the calcium channel are still open and they close slowly. So that's why some calcium ion would continue to gain entry from the ECF into the cell. So that's why there would not be a you can say a quick drop in the curve. There would be a constant plateau phase that would be obtained till here. Now what would happen here? Here potassium channels would open, and potassium ion would efflux from the cell into the ECF, and then again the repolarization would happen here after the opening of the potassium channels. That is all about the smooth muscles. Now here what happens? In order to maintain the balance, there are two type of channels. Talking about, first of all, we have the we have the sodium and calcium. We have the sodium and calcium exchanger. Now what is the function of sodium calcium exchanger? This exchanger keeps the sodium ion inside the cell and causes the efflux of calcium ions. So calcium ions are moved from the cell into the ECF, and sodium ions are still in greater concentration inside the cell. So in order to tackle this, there is the sodium potassium pump, which we have studied earlier, and this this pump actually then causes the efflux of two sodium ions out of the cell and causes the gain of one potassium ion into the cell. So this is how again the balance is achieved. Now talking about the cardiac muscle. So in the cardiac muscle, the resting membrane potential is very much negative, that is minus 90 millivolts, and also there are sodium channels along with the calcium channels who both are contributing in causing the depolarization phase. So a continuous surge occur, and at the level of plus 10 millivolts, depolarization phase is achieved through the calcium and sodium channels. Now talking about, this is the you can say peak of depolarization. You can see that a quick drop in the curve. This is depicting the repolarization. Now why this repolarization has happened, small repolarization phase, why this small repolarization phase has come here? Because of the transient potassium channels. These transient potassium channels actually, what happens that here, that some potassium ions have moved out from the cell into the ECF. So due to these transient potassium channels, a small repolarization phase has emerged here. Again, this is the plateau phase that has been obtained just like the smooth muscle. Why? Because what is happening here? Calcium channels are open, and some because these calcium channels actually close slowly. So that's why some calcium ions are gaining entry from the ECF into the cell, and alongside what happened, that transient potassium channels are also open. So both are happening side by side. Potassium ions are also moving out, and calcium ions are also gaining entry. So there is a balance between them. That's why there wouldn't be a sudden drop in the curve. A balance would be achieved, and a constant plateau phase would be obtained here till here. So plateau phase would be obtained. Plateau phase would be obtained. Why? Because transient potassium channels are also working, and calcium channels are also not closed. Calcium ions are getting entry, potassium ions are coming out. So plateau phase is obtained till here. Here what happens again, the active potassium channels would open, and potassium efflux would occur, and again repolarization would happen. And also there are two type of pumps present. Sodium calcium exchanger, which what is the job of sodium calcium exchanger, I have explained here. And what is here exactly the same is happening, that sodium ion would remain inside, calcium ion would go outside, and the level of sodium ions still would be greater inside the cell. So again sodium potassium pump would work, and would cause the expel of two sodium ions out of the cell, and would cause the gain of one potassium ion into the cell. This is what would be happening in the cardiac muscle. So hope you have understood the difference of the action potential in skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle well, and hope you would be ready to explain it. Thank you.